From the studios of Foxboro Cable Access, located in the center of Foxborough, Massachusetts, you are watching Around Foxborough.
Welcome to another episode of Around Foxborough. My name is Julie Love. I'm your host. Today we have a local guest. He is a Foxborough resident and then has done something very, very significant in our state of Massachusetts. His name is Jerry Cibley.
Hi, Jerry.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Great.
It's always a pleasure to see you.
Great, thank you so much. So in our town, you're famous. Also, you're famous in the state of Massachusetts. And then would you tell us why?
Well, I don't know if the word famous is the right term, but I'm certainly a well-known public figure. In 2007, May 13th, which happened to be Mother's Day, my 18-year-old son, Jordan, who was 3 weeks shy of graduating from Foxborough High School. It had actually been his first year. He moved in with his stepmom and I. And it was the night after the prom. He was delivering pictures to his girlfriend. And as he was leaving her house, somehow he dropped his phone, unbuckled his seatbelt, and crashed into a tree and was immediately killed. And so I have been on a 13-year mission to try and change legislation in Massachusetts, which I am so proud to say finally got changed and went into law this past March 31st. And it is the hands-free driving bill, which would have absolutely saved my son's life and saved the lives of countless other people who worked very hard with me to get this legislation passed.
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry to
Thank you.
hear the loss of your son. And second of all, I really commend you for your persistency and then going after this bill for 13 years.
13 years, yes. We fell off that horse 13 times. And the last time we were able to hold on, and we got the support finally of the Speaker of the House, and we got the support from Governor Baker, he's been wonderful. It's kind of thrilling when I tell people, the governor knows me by name. Oprah knows who I am. I've met some pretty impressive people along the way, and kind of like one of those things when life hands you lemons, you squeeze them and you open up a lemonade stand, and that's kind of how I look at this. I didn't want him to die in vain, and I needed to do something to help other people so that other families would not have to endure and go through what my wife and I go through on a daily basis. The pain never goes away, but I would like to say that for those who've ever lost a child, and hopefully nobody will, but the reality is it does happen, and there is life after losing somebody incredibly close to you. We still have fun, we still enjoy our lives, and it's a little bit hollow, but it's okay.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So before this show, I had some conversation with you about
Yes.
a lot of people had supported during these 13 years of the bill passing, and then one of it was AAA.
Yes, Mary McGuire of AAA and the entire legislative team of AAA has been with us. Safe Roads Alliance, which I used to be a board member of before I started my own foundation. They were very helpful. Jeff Larison from the Department of Transportation, and countless other people, too many to name, but I will throw a couple of other names out there. We did have other parents who had lost children, and they were very, very involved, the Levitons and a couple of other local people.
So why do you think it took so long?
Well, we had a number of issues. Early on, people didn't want their civil liberties impinged upon. As we got closer to getting it done this past year, after it was voted on by both the House and the Senate, they couldn't agree on the language because there was a racial profiling aspect of it and a mandate for reporting the race, and it somehow got hooked into this legislation, and it took them over 120 days. We really thought it was going to be killed, even though we were just waiting for 5 signatures or 6 signatures, and we couldn't get it done. We couldn't get it done. The news media they were phenomenal. They all supported us, and a special shout out, if you're watching, Maria Stefanos of WCVB and Charmin Sacchetti, great friends. She's now with CVB. She was with Channel 7. And every other news media outlet, I knew them all. They were all at my home. And my pal Gail Huff, who's now in New Zealand with her husband, Senator Brown. And he is the ambassador, and then they will be coming back from New Zealand. I think in the fall he's going to be taking over the deanship of Suffolk Law, so it's kind of exciting.
And Senator Feeney locally too.
Paul Feeney, the best.
Wow. So now the law has passed. What are the specifics of the law?
Well, the specifics are that it is a primary infraction, meaning the police officer can stop you for doing nothing more than holding a cell phone in your hand, whether you are moving or not moving. So if your engine is running, they can cite you. Even if you're pulled over at the side of the road, if your car is on, it is an offense. And the first offense, it's $100. The second offense is $250, and you have to take a refresher course, which I'm hoping to be possibly a part of that curriculum. And it's also points on your driver's insurance. And the third is another refresher course, only this time it's $500. So you could pay an awful lot of money with the point structure and the fines if you don't obey the law. And I went out with Sergeant David Fiscaldo of the Foxborough Police Department the first day, and Channel 5 was with us. And we made 4 stops. And I got to talk to all of them. And if your viewers would like to see that clip, that's actually on my website, which is www.hangupdrive, all one word, HANGUPDRIVE, and I'm a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. And I'll take this moment to ask for donations so that I can go around and teach people about the dangers of distracted driving, starting with the children.
Got it. And then you've done some educational portion of it through the nonprofit.
A lot of it before we were nonprofit. I actually didn't start the nonprofit officially until the legislation was passed, because I didn't want to be another Me Too. There are a number of different ones out there. They're all very good, and we've all worked together to really help things out.
Got it. And then I've heard that you're moving to Florida.
We are moving to Florida, one of the remaining states. Actually, I looked it up again before I came over. Right now we have 22 states with formal hands-free laws, and the District of Columbia. So 23 major areas, states, and districts where you cannot pick up a phone.
How about New England? Is it all?
All New England. We were the last holdout.
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yes.
That's very.
And New York and New Jersey have been, I mean, they're not considered part of New England, but I think many people do lump them in as a portion of New England, although I know it's not official, but I was never good in geography, so.
So when you move to Florida,
yes,
what is your plan?
I'm going to start with my friends at AAA, reach out to them, see if I can get a meeting with some of the state legislators, and we'll approach it the same way we did here. I know some of the players in Florida, and wherever you go, unfortunately, you find people who have lost children, spouses, parents, aunts, uncles, or some sort of good friend to a distracted driving accident. We call them crashes today. We got that through. No one calls them accidents anymore because they're really crashes, and that's what they should be called.
And we had talked about in the past that possibly maybe in the federal level, so maybe...
I'd like to get it federally legislated. Unfortunately, because of COVID, my appointments with both Congressman Keating and Congressman Kennedy, hopefully Senator Kennedy, were postponed, but they promised that I will get an opportunity to get up to bat with them.
Because I would like you to not spend another 13 years in Florida.
Well, you know, it's so easy for the federal government to link it to highway funds. And that's really what it should do. In order to stop people from reckless behavior, we need to link it to force the states to implement, or perhaps maybe there'll be a federal mandate. Federal always trumps state, so I think that's a possibility, but I'm not holding my breath anytime soon. But in Massachusetts, we started literally with, a couple of legislators who said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And Senator, a good friend of mine now, Mark Montigny of New Bedford, Mark was the first one to file, believe it or not, a year or so before my Jordan was even killed, that he had filed the bill and didn't get anywhere with it, but a huge champion, and just such a caring. He and Paul Feeney were amongst my closest allies in the legislature, and just terrific people.
Well,
they care.
I absolutely commend you for your
Thank
vision
you.
and persistency and an action, because not so many people can do that.
Well, as I told, and I've said in every single interview I've ever done, it was a no-brainer. Who doesn't want to save a life? Should I save a life? Shouldn't I save a life? Yeah, that's a tough decision. Let's save lives. Pretty easy.
Wow, that's very powerful. So on your website, what can people find?
Well, they can find a way to reach me. They can sign up for my newsletter, which hopefully by the end of the summer we'll have our first one out when we get some names on the list. Again, I was pretty much impacted. I had a full-time public relations man who was going to be doing some work for me, and literally the week after I hired him, everything closed down. So we kind of put most of it on hold, but the purpose of the 501c3 is to provide education to driving schools, to high schools, and even, believe it or not, in preschools. When children are little, we teach them about seatbelt use. And I remember when my children were 3 or 4 years old, anytime we got into an automobile, their response is, Daddy, Mommy, put on your seatbelt. And that's great training. And when my son came home from preschool, I remember I said, what did you do today, Jordan? He said, we learned about fire and how to save ourselves. I said, what happens if you catch on fire? And he smiled and he said, I'd stop, drop, and roll. That's what Mrs. Sewick said. So young children learn these. And if we can do the same with our young children, we grow them. We grow behaviors as far as I'm concerned. And if we can put them in a position where they grow up knowing that they have to have a seatbelt on. And the irony is, my son, who was so good about seatbelts, he actually took his seatbelt off. If he had had his seatbelt on, he wouldn't have died. But he was doing about 30 miles an hour or less. And when he dropped his phone, fell out of his hand. It was a clamshell phone, an old style. And they found him without a seatbelt. And I knew him. He never went without a seatbelt. It was just something when he got in the car, before he even started, the seatbelt was on. I never saw him not wear his belt.
I'm so sorry. It's
yeah, it was, as I tell people, not the best day.
Yes. So you are a Foxborough resident, and then you worked with Foxborough Police Department also.
I've worked very closely with the chief, the former chief, and as I said, Dave Foscaldo is my hero. He was with me when he was the one who told me that my son was in a terrible crash. He got permission from, at the time, Sergeant Grace, who's now our chief, to drive me to the hospital and stay with me. And I didn't realize until I went riding along with Dave Foscaldo and the chief was available for interviews with WCVB, I didn't realize that he was the sergeant that authorized it, and it just brought chills up my spine. I just couldn't believe it, that we were all here again together, and they have been, Foxborough police have just been fabulous. Couldn't ask for a better town.
Wow. So after the law has passed, have you gotten any feedbacks from police officers or
Well,
different
yes, I've
authorities?
spoken with the colonel of the state police many times. We've been on a number of programs together and spoken. And, they're writing tickets, but this COVID really has impacted a lot of things. I don't think we're going to have any really good statistics until the world is kind of back to normal.
Sure.
And I think the police have had other things that were probably more pressing than to do a complete push on distracted driving implementation, which I know it's important, and they're not going to forget us. But we've had bigger problems, unfortunately.
But overall, how are the feedback from the police officers?
Feedback is they're writing tickets.
Okay.
They're writing tickets, they're stopping people, they're educating them, and hopefully they're getting an understanding that when you drive at 60 miles an hour and you take your phone, your eyes off the road to look at your phone or to dial, in the time it takes to dial a phone number at 60 miles an hour, you've gone the length of 2 football fields. So I don't know anyone who would be willing to go 2 football fields with curves and hills and things like that at 60 miles an hour with their eyes closed. It's impossible.
I see. So it made police officer easier to do this job.
We had a no texting law, which I helped to pass as well about 8 years ago. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to ticket on, because anytime you stopped somebody and you'd say, "Miss Love, you were texting." No, officer, I was calling my mother in Japan. And you couldn't prove it. You'd have to get a subpoena for the records, and it was just too much paperwork. Today, all the officer has to do is see you with a phone in your hand, whether you're holding it down, whether you're holding it up, whether you're using it as your GPS. You're allowed to make an emergency call, of course, to call 911, and you're allowed one push of a button on a phone or on a GPS.
I see. So with the 501c status that you received,
Yes.
and then the nonprofit, what are the hopes? I know you're going to Florida, and then you mentioned about education piece, but besides that, is there anything else that people should look out on your website?
One never knows. I'm a serial entrepreneur. You asked me a question before we started. What exactly do you do for a
Yes.
living? And I guess that depends on the year. I've had 3 or 4 successful careers. I've enjoyed them all. And I'm going to be launching my new full-time career in Florida, which is photography for real estate, high-end real estate. So I've been a photographer since I was 3 years old, and have all the technologies, including the drones and the ability to do floor plans. So I'm running it here until we move. I don't know exactly when we're going to move, because our house is being built and everything's being impacted by this pandemic. So I'm not sure exactly. Trying to sell the house if anyone's looking for a condo.
All right. So with website and what you're doing, but you have so many other things that's going in
I
your
do,
life.
but my passion is to save lives, and every single speech and any time I was ever in public talking about distracted driving, I always wind up ending every speech by looking up and telling my son, "We done good today, Jordan." And I think any day that you can save a life, and I've had so many people come to me and say, "Jerry, I heard you speak," or "I was involved in something that you were involved in, and I was moved." And I used to text all the time, or I used to talk all the time. I now put down my phone, and I'm convinced you saved my life. There's a woman who's a town clerk in one of the local towns, and she's a beautiful, beautiful woman. And the first time I became friendly with her was when she came up to me at a Christmas party of a mutual friend, and she said, "You saved my life, Jerry." And I went, "How?" She said, "I was horrible. I was texting, I was calling, I was not paying attention, and I'm convinced that I would have had a fatality on one day." So I really believe that we are saving lives.
Wow.
And it's a nice feeling.
I'm very sorry of what happened, but at the same time, like you said about the lemonade stand, so.
I mean, there's nothing I can do with the past,
Right.
so I have to do something for the future. And the night before he was buried, I was on WBZ with Jordan Rich, another good friend, and Jordan asked me, "What are you going to do, Jerry? How are you going to prevent this?" And I said, "I'm going to start lobbying and legislating for a change." Never did I think 13 years it would take, but that's okay, because now I can look backwards and say, wow, we got it done. And I gave it up for almost a year where I was demoralized. I felt beaten up. I just couldn't seem to get anywhere. And by that time, there were a number of other families, unfortunately, who were part of my group. And that was very, very sad to see people like Tom Branley from, I think he's Norwood. He lost his beautiful daughter, Katie. She was walking in a crosswalk. She was struck, and she lingered an entire year before she ultimately passed. And as I mentioned before, the Levitons, they lost their daughter, Merritt, and she passed away. She was struck on her bicycle, and this person struck 3 or 4 people. It was out of state, but they came back to Boston, originally from Boston, to help legislate with us. And they were, a lot of us were very involved with the press. And then there's Emily, who's now the president of Safe Roads Alliance. She lost her father, Howard Stein. So we've had a lot of people who unfortunately joined us, and their voice was heard. We've had survivors as part of our group. And when I say survivors, these are people that had traumatic brain injuries, sustained life-altering injuries, and somehow clawed their way back to life, but will never be the same.
Wow. Well, I'm very overwhelmed and hearing these powerful stories, not only from yours, but the others, and then the importance of passing this bill. And now I know you mentioned you might be writing a book.
I started a book. I've finished. I'll have to send you the prologue. It's taken me 13 years so far. Not gotten terribly far with it, but a friend of mine whose daughter was murdered over 30 years ago, she just published the book, and I'm honored to say I've got a couple of pages in there about me and some of the things I did to help her. I did not know her. Her name was Sarah Pryor. She was a resident of Wayland, and she was 10 years old when she was abducted, and it took nearly 20 plus years for them to come to a resolution. And a dog had actually literally picked up a small piece of fragment of her skull bone, and it took over 2 years, I believe, to get the DNA back. This is when DNA testing was kind of in its infancy, and FBI was the only place that could do it. Today, we probably would have had an answer in hours, but back then, and so her family got a conclusion, but I had helped. I owned a photo lab at the time, and I had made thousands and thousands of pictures of Sarah and became friendly with her mom, and so she included me in her book.
And then I know you mentioned your book title.
Because There Are No Words. That's the title, and I've looked in every language I can find. When a woman loses her husband, she becomes a widower. If a husband loses a wife, husband loses a wife, he's a widower. Woman loses her husband, she's a widow. Partner loses a partner, they're widowers. I'm not sure how to be politically correct on that, but the long and short, a child loses parents, they become an orphan. But a parent that loses a child, there are no words because I don't think there are words that can describe them. Is there a word in Japanese?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. But you have orphans and you have
Yeah,
widows and widowers, right?
Right.
So
That is very powerful title.
thank you.
And I really hope that you're going to publish it.
We'll see. I'll get your opinion on the prologue as to whether I should continue.
Yeah. And just to let you know, this is just me being Japanese and then passing the bill, new very strict law about drinking and driving in Japan. Just to
Great.
share with you that before we didn't have that, but we had some cases. And then the new bill is basically when you are driving with alcohol in it, you're gonna be banned for the license. But not only that, the people in the passenger seat or back seat.
No way, they take away their licenses too?
No.
Okay.
If you're a doctor, you're gonna lose your doctor's license.
No way, that's
If you're
great.
a lawyer,
You're gonna lose your law
use
license?
Yeah,
That is
absolutely.
fabulous.
If you're a teacher, you're getting fired
So
automatically.
what they're saying in Japan is you are your brother's keeper. You are your brother's keeper, which is terrific.
So nobody does that.
No, that's
It's
wonderful.
a risk, right?
Yes,
Yes. So I think what you have done in this state,
thank you.
that this law now would definitely prevent, and then people would have precaution.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. That's wonderful. And it kind of goes to, our criminal code, which if you are in the car and somebody goes in to rob a store and there are shots fired and the person dies behind the counter, the person in the car is also tried and found guilty of murder,
Yes.
usually in the second degree, but
Accomplice. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah. And they can do 25, 30 years.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I really appreciate you sharing the story. I know
Oh,
you've
it's a
shared
pleasure.
your story so many times in
It
the past.
it doesn't get hard to share it. People ask me, how do you do it so many times?
Sure.
And doesn't it get old? And there's always something a little bit different, depending upon the host. And I know you care, Jury, and
Absolutely, yes.
You and I met the first time at Paul Feeney's
Yes.
kickoff campaign. And I remember you and I had talked on the phone prior because Maria had suggested I get in contact with you.
Yes.
And I remember you looked at me and you said, Jerry? And I said, Jury?
That's right.
With your beautiful children. And we formed a wonderful friendship that I'm hoping we will have forever because you are a great, great young woman. And I can't wait to read your book, which you're going to autograph to me, correct?
Yes.
In both Japanese and English?
Yes.
Okay.
I will. Well, thank you very much, Sherry,
Thanks for having me.
being our show around Foxborough. And thanks everyone for watching this episode of Around Foxborough. My name is Julie Love. We have Paul Beck as our director, Michael Weber as our executive director. Our website is fcatv.org, and you can come find our show Around Foxborough by clicking the link. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.